Retro now.
Hello there. This is James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and whenever I'm in this part of the galaxy, I listen to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Makes flying a little more tolerable. Don't tell Anakin.
Hello there, and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
This episode features the next installment of our series celebrating Revenge of the Sith for its 25th anniversary. But before we get into that, let's take care of a little business. Jay, remind everybody what our social media contacts are.
Absolutely. We are on Facebook and Instagram very conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the dish is aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So this is part 4 of our Revenge of the Sith series. We've got a great guest coming up for you here. Jay, as we kind of say at the end of this discussion, which we'll play here in just a moment, we've been very fortunate to get a lot of great guests that bring their A game every time and to really enhance this series, and this episode is no exception.
Oh, we have indeed. And just the passion and knowledge that our guests bring with them, especially this one in this particular segment, is just second to none.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we get into the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. So without any further ado, let's dive into Revenge of the Sith, Part 4. So we are thrilled to welcome back a returning guest, Alan Voivod from Star Wars 7x7. Alan, thank you so much for coming back and being a part of our Revenge of the Sith series. We've been thrilled to have you for every one of these we've done so far, and it would not be the same without you. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing really well and so excited to be back with the two of you. This is always fun, and I'm so excited in general, but also so excited for the segment that you've invited me back for too.
Yeah, and ironically, this is going to drop just a few days in advance of the rescreening of Revenge of the Sith in theaters too. So that's pretty exciting.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, it's always great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right. Well, we've, as usual, we have a few questions that we like to start this off with for our guests. Jay, you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Absolutely. So, Alan, here we go. So, what was your first experience seeing Revenge of the Sith? How old were you? What do you remember about that screening? And just any details that you can provide.
So I grew up in Southern California, Los Angeles area, and moved with my family to New Hampshire in 2003. So Revenge of the Sith was the first Star Wars movie, the first newly released Star Wars movie that I saw in New Hampshire instead of in Southern California. And there is a little 8-screen movie theater in the town that I live in. So I went to a midnight showing at that theater, which was it was great to be able to do it, and it was like a wonderful experience. I was, let me do the math, 34 years old at the time, and I really enjoyed it. I think it's pretty safe to say that it's a consensus opinion that it's considered the best of the 3 of the prequel movies, or at least certainly the most critically acclaimed and the most fan appreciated. And my experience was the same, but it was also the one Star Wars movie that I could not show my young son at the time. And so I was at a birthday party with him where he scraped his knee on a driveway, and I sat with him later on that summer, and to try to take his mind off the pain of his scraped knee, I told him the story of Revenge of the Sith. So I still kind of carry that moment a little close to my heart, that I was able to like sit with him and at least tell him that, because I think it was a little too intense for young Joe at the time.
Sure, sure. I love that story though.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, I
awesome.
love that one too. Yeah, I was a new dad when this movie came out, so
Uh,
taking my son to see Star Wars was a goal for the future. But
mhm.
I love your
Mhm.
story here. Okay, next question: what is your favorite scene from Revenge of the Sith?
Oh gosh. I still laugh every time Obi-Wan pops up and goes, "Hello there." Like I can't help it. It's so perfect and this I mean it is iconic. It is almost a guarantee that I will use that GIF in some sort of group chat when I'm showing up to, chime in about something or ask questions if I haven't been active in a while. Like just the way that he shows up, his expression, like the aliveness of Ewan McGregor in that moment is just so much fun. I love it. It still holds up for me. Um, it's just so silly. And yeah, I get giddy with anticipation when I am watching the movie and I know that it's coming. I'm like, here we go, here we go.
You're right.
Mm,
It's just pure joy on his face when he does that.
Oh
That's so
yeah,
great.
yeah. How
that
about you
is,
two? Have you answered this question yet?
I don't
Kinda,
know. We
sorta.
have, yeah, but well, I'll just say this before I answer that question. When I met Ewan at Star Wars Celebration Anaheim,
Ah,
for his to get his autograph, my wife and my boys were with us, and that's how he greeted us with the "hello there" thing. And I mean,
nice.
it was a bit of a blur. He didn't have a whole lot of time to spend with everybody, but that was enough. That's all I needed when I was
That's
getting the
so
autograph.
awesome.
Jay, what is your favorite scene?
Oh, I mean, it's kind of a cop out, but I mean, the Battle of the Heroes, on Mustafar. I mean, just the amazing lightsaber technique between Ewan and Hayden is just hands down one of the most exciting things on screen, and
Mhm.
it always will be for me. But yeah, I mean, there's so many iconic scenes in this. It is really hard to pick, but that one I go back to, over and over and over again for sure. But what
Hmm.
about you, Dennis?
Oh, I change my answer every time this comes up, but because it just really depends on what I'm in the mood for. Whether it is like we're going to get to later, the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, or I'm in
Mm,
the mood for a saber fight or something like that. But the one thing that I remember from seeing this movie, and it hooked me from the beginning and kept me coming back every time, was the opening scene when Anakin and
Mm.
Obi-Wan fly their Jedi starfighters in over the Republic cruiser, and then into that battle, and you just see everything going on around them. That just I'm a sucker for the giant space battles, and that
yeah.
one is I still think the Battle of Endor from Return of the Jedi is the best one yet, but
Mm,
just the sequence of arriving at the Battle of Coruscant at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith is just unmatched in the special effects and the completeness and everything that they have going on in there.
Yeah,
oh
it's
yeah.
gorgeous.
I agree with both of you. Like, and the drums at the beginning of
Oh,
that
yeah.
are fantastic. Oh my gosh. Eh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I can't
Getting
wait to
chills.
experience that in the theater again. Just the music, that's another thing too, with all the sequences that we've brought up, but, John Williams' music is just second to none
Right.
in
Mm-hmm.
every scene, for
Hmm.
sure. So, thank you for letting us geek out about that, Alan.
Oh yeah.
All right, so our last question to wrap this segment up before we get into the actual segment of the movie is, who is your favorite character in Revenge of the Sith?
It's R2D2. It's always R2D2. I mean,
Nice.
so my second, choice for a favorite scene would be when he just tears up those B2 battle droids on
Oh,
the
yeah.
invisible hand at the beginning. They're like, it's Russ Bucket kicking him around, and yeah, and he just sets them on fire and just goes whistling on his merry way. Like I love it. I have always loved R2D2, and when they do the March Madness things, they haven't done it for a few years, but on StarWars.com where they do the favorite character and whatnot, I'm
Oh,
always
yeah.
voting for R2. He's my number one guy.
I like it.
R2 is the best.
Oh yeah.
All right, well that's
And you
fantastic.
guys?
Oh, ours. I think I've been going with Obi-Wan when I've been asked this question most of the time. Again, it usually alternates between Anakin and Obi-Wan when it comes down to it, just whether I'm feeling grumpy or not, I suppose. But, Jay?
For me, it's Anakin. It's always
Yeah.
Anakin. You
Mm,
know,
mm.
Anakin always has my heart. So
Yeah.
no matter
All
what.
All right, well, let's dive into the segment. We've got so much to cover this evening,
Mm.
but it was one of those situations where I try to break this off into about as close to a 10-minute segment as I can. The problem with that is that lands right in the middle of a very iconic scene, so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
couldn't break that off that way. So this starts at 34 minutes and 43 seconds and ends at just about 48 minutes even. And it starts off with Anakin arriving late for a briefing from Obi-Wan Kenobi on the status of the Outer Rim sieges, to which Obi-Wan reports Seleucus has fallen, Master Voss has moved his troops to Baz Pity, and when Anakin asks him, you seem concerned, what's going on? He says, well, the Senate is expected to devote more emergency powers to the Chancellor. And then from there, it's even worse in Obi-Wan's eyes because the Chancellor has requested Anakin's presence and he didn't tell the Jedi why he wants to talk to him. And this makes Obi-Wan feel uneasy. Alan, something occurred to me when I was watching this segment to prepare for our discussion is I think this movie is actually underrated for how well they set everything up with the distrust that builds between Anakin and the Jedi and Anakin and Jedi and Palpatine feeds into everything. And this is just, I think, an underrated scene in that entire sequence. But what do you think about this exchange between Obi-Wan and Anakin?
Yeah, George Lucas is not necessarily, always lauded for his writing, certainly for his vision and his directing and his, special effects and editing and whatnot. But like this movie, I really think he got the writing down cold, and the way that every piece builds upon itself. And if I could take a second just to flag that we're coming into this scene from Anakin having been with Yoda and having that exchange about, miss them not, mourn them not, and you just got to let go of everything you fear to lose, and like just how terrible that advice is when it's just delivered
Yeah.
so flatly like that. And so that's how he's coming in to this meeting with Obi-Wan in just a terrible mood to begin with, and then to be told, oh no, something's going on with Palpatine and he's being cagey about it and it's setting Obi-Wan on edge. Like you just feel the screws tightening. It is really well done. Like I definitely gained a greater appreciation for George Lucas's writing as I was going through this segment and just seeing how it's building very, very well. I used to think of it as just like Palpatine building it very well, but now I'm just thinking about it as George Lucas building it very well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Alan actually brought something up I was going to ask about, Jay, which is that Anakin shows up and basically tells Obi-Wan, yeah, sorry I'm late. I have no excuse.
Mm-hmm.
And does not mention at all to Obi-Wan that he was talking to Yoda and
Right.
that he was seeking advice on there. What do you make of that?
Well, it brings me back immediately to, as far as Padmé saying, do you think Obi-Wan could help? And Anakin immediately said, we don't need his help, kind of thing. And so he obviously did not want to involve Obi-Wan in any of his fears of losing Padmé at all. But I mean, to his credit, he didn't try to lie or cover anything up. He just said, I have no excuse, and just kind of left it at that. And so I just think that was kind of a good way to leave it in that instance. But it also brings me back to just now, especially now that we're rewatching the Clone Wars and just trying to put this into the perspective of where this is happening within the Clone Wars as well, just before the Siege of Mandalore and everything else as well. And, just knowing that there's that other relationship that he has with Ahsoka that's obviously never mentioned because that was never created at this point. But, we know that it's there. But, Alan, to your point, as far as just the machinations of Palpatine and just as you said, the screws are tightening and just this distrust all around. And then Anakin is just feeling it from all sides is just heightening that so much.
Indeed. And something I just want to mention now, but we can discuss it a little bit later. Here are some other scenes. Is that there's a little bit of tension between Obi-Wan and Anakin that builds up, I'll think, until it gets released when they say goodbye to each other before Obi-Wan goes off to look for Grievous here. And there's a little bit of that here. I kind of see that in Obi-Wan's, the way he's talking to Anakin. It's, he's uneasy about something. He doesn't want to send Anakin off to talk to Palpatine, but he feels like he has to, and he's doing something that he knows Anakin is, may not be in Anakin's best interest, which gets us to the very next scene, which is in Chancellor Palpatine office. I kind of had to laugh watching this today. I had paused my rewatch right at the end of the last scene to take care of something else. And I turned it on. I could almost feel like the way this one was paced is almost like someone yelled cut and they started acting. But anyway, it's just the way that the whole scene starts. They're just kind of like pausing and they look at each other and just start talking. I don't know. Hard to
Yeah, it
explain.
is a little off, isn't it?
Yeah. But Palpatine starts the whole thing by saying that he hopes Anakin trusts him. And Anakin is clearly sensing something is up. And then Palpatine says he wants Anakin to be his eyes, ears, and the voice of the public. And to that end, he's appointing Anakin to be his representative on the Jedi Council, to which Anakin is overwhelmed. He knows that the Jedi Council is not going to accept this, but Palpatine says, I think they'll see my way about this. So what do you think about this, Alan, with the Palpatine interjecting himself into Jedi affairs more blatantly than ever in this instance?
Well, the first thing that jumped out at me in that scene was when Palpatine looks at Anakin and he says, "I need you, son." And I was like, that's kind of a gambit to refer to Anakin as son in the first place, which, like sometimes, people of a certain vintage are inclined to speak to, people of a younger vintage and say, like, okay, son, like just like it's sort of acknowledging the age difference in the situation. But like Anakin without a father in the first place, to say nothing of without a mother, and the mentor relationship that they have, the friendship that they had, but like to go to son, like that seemed like a stepping up of the relationship building in a way of the commitment that Palpatine is trying to make in bringing Anakin to his side. And I don't recall having remarked upon the use of son in previous viewings, and so I thought, oh, this is him actually kind of stepping out on a limb, and it almost feels like he's accelerating things a little bit as a result. So it felt kind of like it felt a little queasy and nervous making. Like it was like, oh, he's like we're in the end game of this. And obviously we've all watched this 1,000 times, so we know that he's in the end game of this. But to see, like, it's almost as if Palpatine's ambition is just starting to run ahead of himself just a little bit more in it. And so like he's like, okay, I think this is the final set of moves that is going to lead me to throwing everything off. And this has been decades in the making, so it's just it's wild to watch it with with more detail and all of the context for it. And yeah, it's again, this is it's Palpatine's plan, but it's George Lucas's writing. He's he's doing real well with it.
Yeah, for sure. And I have to interject, Alan, too. You said this has been going on for decades. And the fact that he calls Anakin son, and I mean, let's face it, Palpatine's grooming of Anakin to the dark side is one of the most intricate and sinister manipulations in all of Star Wars. He's been playing this long game for a really long time, even as, a young boy, and calling Anakin the most gifted Jedi I have ever met. So it's planting these seeds all along the way and then just fueling that fire of his, distrust in, the Jedi, and, oh, they'll see things my way, kind of thing. Don't you worry about it.
Yeah, and grooming is the exact right word for this situation, as challenging a word as that is, but like that
Right.
is what's happening here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you guys anticipated a lot of the questions I was about to ask, so well done. I guess the other comment I'd make here is that Palpatine is so far ahead of everybody here. You know, he manipulated Anakin to taking out Dooku by playing on his anger, his desire for revenge, and making it seem like a completely natural thing. And now, through his relationship with Anakin that he's built up over the years, he's dangling the next thing that he knows Anakin wants right in front of his eyes. And that's a seat at the table with the Jedi Council, so to speak. And because it's a minor thing now, but it has the potential to be so much larger. And he also knows it'll drive that wedge between Anakin and the Jedi, because the Jedi aren't going to like that Palpatine made this decision for them. And so he's just working on multiple levels there. And this was incredibly well crafted. And, you know, that's the thing, is that I think a lot of people criticize Revenge of the Sith for the whole Padme caused Anakin to fall to the dark side with these visions that he was having her die in childbirth and just giving up hope at the end. And while that part, you know, dying, you know, she lost the will to live type of thing is a weak point, it's everything else that leads up to that is masterful. So it just is weird the way it kind of fizzles there on that last part of the plan. But that's a conversation for another segment.
One thing I'll flag about this scene too, if I may. I'm like, I have Paul Duncan's The Star Wars Archive for Revenge, for the whole prequel trilogy, and I was flipping through that in preparation for the episode, and that was another reason why I wanted to flag the Yoda and Anakin scene prior to this segment, because there is a thing in there about how it is an intentional design choice for the making of the movie that scene with Yoda and Anakin takes place in near darkness, whereas the scene with Palpatine and Anakin takes place in a very bright daylit office, and it's supposed to be indicative of the conflict within Anakin, and also kind of doing a little bit of a twist on, oh, you know, it's sort of the dark with Yoda, but it's the light with Palpatine. So it kind of throws things off a little bit.
I like that. That's really cool. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it makes so much sense. And I mean, just the fact that there's so much red, which should also be a no pun intended red flag, you know, so much red in Palpatine's office, but it's very vibrant, it's very alive, you know, red is the color of the blood that's going through our veins as well, which is life. And that's exactly what Anakin was trying to preserve, was Padmé's life, you know, at this point. So I love that. I love that. And one more thing too, while we're citing other source material, the novelization by Matthew Stover also. Yes, this talks about the first thing that Anakin thinks about before he actually goes to see Palpatine is the fact that if he were only a master, then he could access the Jedi archives, where a lot of this information about retrieving, you know, being able to save someone from death, or, you know, all these arcane types of force skills, only masters could access those. So when Palpatine dangles this little carrot in front of him in his apartment about being appointed to the Jedi Council, that's immediately where Anakin's, you know, mind goes, is, oh my gosh, if I'm a master, I can go to the archives and I can solve my problem.
Absolutely. And you know, for the three of us on the call, like, I'm just waving the Revenge of the Sith novelization on screen because I was looking at that too.
Love it. Great minds think alike.
Oh my gosh.
So the action moves from here to the Jedi Temple, and this is where Anakin has off-screen presented his appointment to the Jedi, and they're none too pleased about it. Yoda remarks that this is disturbing. Mace proclaims, well, you're on the council, but you do not have the rank of master, to which Anakin throws a little bit of a tantrum. He says, this is outrageous. It's unfair. It's never been done before. And then Mace Windu tells him to take a seat, young Skywalker. And, you know, there's also just kind of a horrified look on Obi-Wan's face.
Oh, like, yeah,
I raised you better than that. And so Anakin kind of comes back to himself and apologizes. And then he, you know, takes a seat and kind of looks over at Obi-Wan, clearly still upset and shaken about this. The Jedi reaction. Anakin is presenting an appointment from Palpatine, which he knew that the Jedi weren't going to like, and then he gets alarmed when they don't give him the rank of master about this. So, does this seem incongruent to you, Anakin, Alan? And sorry about that.
That's it.
Or what do you think of the reaction and the way that the Jedi dealt with this?
I just think in general the Jedi were letting Anakin down on a pretty regular basis throughout Revenge of the Sith. And it has always been a little frustrating to me as a viewer, but as I've watched more Star Wars storytelling over the years with the Clone Wars or reading novels and whatnot, like you see more of the progression toward this. Even just The Living Force by John Jackson Miller that came out last year, I think it was, where the Jedi were challenged by Qui-Gon to get out of their ivory tower and actually go see people in the galaxy. Like they're just completely out of touch with with what's going on in the galaxy. That takes place, of course, before the Phantom Menace. But they seem to just not understand what it is they're dealing with. They're so preoccupied by their own machinations and what's going on with the war that you'd think they would be a little more careful with the guy that is supposed to bring balance to the Force, especially
Right.
when they don't even know. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself on prophecy business, but you'd think they'd be a little more careful, but it's kind of like they've just had it. Mace Windu's just kind of had it with with Anakin by
Yeah.
this point. Like it's like, nope, just I don't want to hear it. Just sit down and shut up. Like it's there is some very like aggrieved parent teenager dynamic kind of things happening with this.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing for Anakin too, I think, is that, I mean, here he is back standing in the center of the Jedi Council, just like he did when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan brought him all the way back when. And he was being judged then as well, and by, none other than Mace Windu as well. And
Mm,
so for him, I think he sees this as just humiliating. He feels like he's earned it. He's had so much experience at this point throughout the Clone Wars, and he's proven himself, hey, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have been able to take down the separatists in Naboo and save Naboo and do all of these things. And so I think that he feels that he's actually earned it. And
hmm
then, of course, in the back of his mind, he's still hearing those whisperings of Palpatine saying they don't trust you, they fear your power, all of these things. And it's just adding fuel to that fire.
Mhm.
yeah, and that was the thing. This was where I was going to bring up the novelization, because in the novelization he is raging mad. Like I mean, you just
Hmm.
see the what business, and and a couple of like it's unheard of, it's unfair, and he gets shut down immediately. But he goes on a tirade in the novelization, and it's wild. And that you know that shame that you talk about, Jay, about just what it was like for him the first time that he was in that room with Qui-Gon, and being seen seen into his soul so clearly.
Right.
It's the novelization added a whole different dimension to things. And I gotta say that was one where like I've never actually read the novelization all the way through. I only read the parts that pertain to our segment tonight. But I was I was eating it up until we got to this one. Then I was like, this feels like it was like I like the way they did it in the movie better. I feel
Hmm.
like yeah, it was better that he did not go on a full on tirade in theaters.
Agreed. Agreed. And it kept it succinct enough to prove the point, but not overdone.
Oh,
Yeah.
but the thing I was gonna flag about that too is that there's actually a scene in the book that you don't get to see in the movie, where the Jedi Council is having the conversation about, okay, we're gonna ask him to spy on Palpatine, and we're gonna set up, oh, Obi-Wan's gonna go and Yoda's gonna go see the Wookiees and all this stuff, and they're having the argument about it, and Obi-Wan doesn't want to do it. He's like trying to defend Anakin and tell
Hmm.
everybody that this is a really bad idea.
Right.
to borrow a phrase, he has a bad feeling about this. And it's a really cool scene that I actually was like, ooh, these kind of, little, sort of deleted scenes, as it were. That really added an extra dimension for me when
Mhm.
I then watched the scene, and I was like, oh, wow. Like they were, of course, all of this was planned naturally. They just didn't show it in the movie. But like that
Sure.
one, I really liked that scene in the book a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah. I would
Mhm.
like to have seen Obi-Wan stand up for Anakin in front of the council in that scene. Now he does it a little bit to a degree later in the segment that we're about to that we'll get to in a moment. But
Yeah.
you know, so let's keep it going here with the second half of this scene as the council resumes their discussion about looking for Grievous, and Yoda determines that he's in the Outer Rim, but there's been this droid attack on the Wookiees, and what are we going to do all about this? And so Yoda says that he's going to go on, and he's got good relations with the Wookiees, or good relations with Wookiees I have, or I can't remember exactly how he says it. It's hard to remember, other than it's backwards, exactly how backwards
Right.
Yoda's syntax can be. So anyway, but I want to get on to unless anyone has something they want to address there, I really want to get on to the next scene between Anakin and Obi-Wan coming out of
Yeah.
this meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, go for it.
So Anakin is still hot coming out of this meeting, and he says this is insulting, and he's going on about Obi-Wan, as his brother, as his mentor, is saying, calm down. You're going to be given a great honor, to be on the council at your age. It's never happened before, and it won't take long until you're appointed. Master actually comes later, but he points out, like, look, and I'm paraphrasing, we didn't make this appointment. Palpatine did, and we can't just give in completely to this and give it everything that comes with that. Otherwise, it's slippery slope. Again, a lot of this is unsaid, but you can kind of see where they're going on here. Is we can't just make you a master out of this and capitulate to whatever it is that Palpatine says. He wanted to say, we serve the Senate. We don't, we don't serve its leader. We aren't loyal to him. It's to democracy. It's to the Republic that's going on in this. But at the same time, Obi-Wan hits Anakin's with some harsh truths. He's just like, yeah, you didn't ask to be put on the council, but it's what you wanted. And your
Yeah.
friendship with Palpatine paid off. And, this is what it looks like to everybody here. So, and then we'll get into the request to spy. But this back and forth,
Mm.
uh, Alan, what do you think about the relationship that these two have, and what does this say about it?
Yeah, this is also another kudos moment for George Lucas for me, because in my head I think to myself, I wish Obi-Wan hadn't like, he kind of put the knife in a little bit with the, but it's what you wanted, and then to say, then to twist it and say, oh, I guess your friendship with Palpatine paid off. It's not, you know, I don't think Anakin necessarily thought about it that way. I don't, it sort of accuses Anakin of being manipulative after a fashion that I don't think Anakin was really, you know, like at worst he wasn't conscious of it. At
Right.
best, he wasn't trying to do it at all. And so and so I'm giving credit to George Lucas, because like, you want Obi-Wan to be perfect. You want Anakin to be perfect too. But like, I sit here and I think to myself, I wish Obi-Wan hadn't said that. But if he hadn't said that, then it's, it's not yet another straw on the camel's back that's eventually going to break it. Like, this is another like good choice by Lucas to show the, the progressive building of the breaking of trust, and the breaking of the bond between brothers. That, like, yes, I mean, it's a harsh truth, and it is the truth, but maybe there's a different way that could have been delivered, or maybe, I guess, like I was saying, like, could have been the knife, but not the twist.
Mhm.
Sure. Yeah. And
Mhm.
to your point too, I mean, when Obi-Wan says that your friendship has paid off, I mean, basically he's almost negating every other accomplishment and sacrifice that Anakin has made. And,
Yes.
basically saying that this is the reason why you're on the council, or it, and not master, obviously, but yeah, your friendship has paid off. Well, that's basically just negating his entire life almost, which
Hmm.
I'm not sure I agree with Obi-Wan saying that, other than just to maybe shake his tree a bit and get him to, see his point of view on things. I don't know. Dennis, what do you think?
Hmm.
Well, okay, keep in mind that after they got back from the Invisible Hand, Obi-Wan gave Anakin all the credit for what happened there. It's like, nope, this
Right.
is your victory. This is you deserve your glorious day with the sinners.
Yeah.
Always makes me laugh. But but in this case, I don't envy the position Obi-Wan was in because
Sure.
he is so close to Anakin. He understands Anakin better than anybody. He's closer to Anakin than anybody else anywhere. Jedi Council, anywhere right now. That's his closest friend. But at the same time, he owes responsibility to the Republic. He owes responsibility to the Jedi Council. He is a master himself, and he knows how unreasonable Anakin can be about things. And he's seen some of Anakin's worst behavior. And so one breath he's trying to get him to calm down, but then when Anakin doesn't respond to that, it's like, hey, this is what you wanted. You wanted to be on the council. You've got that. Your friendship with Palpatine's paid off. It's yes, I bet he regrets saying it that way to Anakin and this, but who hasn't said something that they don't regret to a friend
Sure.
in all these instances? But he's also dealing with the stress of what comes next. He's going to have to tell Anakin the Jedi Council wants him to do something that Obi-Wan doesn't want to put on Anakin's shoulders either here. And his job just got made immensely harder by everything that just happened in the Jedi Council chamber and by Palpatine putting him on that council to begin with on this.
Yeah.
So let's get to that, and we can continue to talk about the other point as we get there. It's Anakin senses that there's another shoe to drop, and he says, and everyone says, I'm on your side. I don't want to put you in this situation. And the council wants Anakin to spy on the Chancellor. And Anakin says, why wasn't this said, in the council? And then Obi-Wan says, the assignment's not to be on the record. Anakin protests, the Chancellor's not a bad man. He befriended me. He watched over me ever since I arrived here. And then Obi-Wan says, this is why you must help us, Anakin. Our allegiance is to the Senate, not to its leader. Something's out of place. And then Anakin's right about this. He says, what you're asking is out of place. It's against the Jedi Code, the Republic, a mentor, and a friend. And Obi-Wan, he is very careful to not say it's all the Jedi Council. He's walking a fine line here. He says, I'm not asking, the Council is, but he's doing his best to try and stick up for both. And again, this is why I have so much empathy for Obi-Wan in this movie. Is scenes like this and Ewan McGregor does a fantastic job handling the weight of these type of scenes, trying to be split, looking after a dear friend, but at the same time honoring his loyalty and his oaths to things that are bigger than himself. So now that I've said all of that, Anakin is furious. Alan, what's your take?
Yeah, it's what you pointed out about the line that Obi-Wan has to walk with this is spot on. I mean, you can see it's in Ewan McGregor's performance, like the sadness of him having to ask Anakin to do this. Just you can hear the regret, and just going back to the novelization about the discussion that happens before the meeting in the Jedi Council chambers of just how Obi-Wan is arguing against doing this and making it clear that they are asking him to choose between loyalties, and they're asking him to break a loyalty situation. Like it's the worst possible scenario for Anakin, who is just intensely loyal, but not necessarily to like the Jedi Code, but just to people, about how he will risk his life to rescue other people. He is loyal to the people that he loves, and they're asking him to betray that loyalty. Like it is his foundational principle basically that they're asking him to go against. And like in the novelization, like this goes on for longer, and ultimately Obi-Wan steers him to a point of, oh, this is all going to be about baiting Darth Sidious because they think Sidious is somewhere in Palpatine's inner circle. And so Anakin's like, oh, so you're just telling me all this so because this is all about trying to discover who Sidious is. And it's like, yes, it's like, okay, maybe we're going to get away with this, but the damage is already done. Even in the novelization, like they've asked him to they've asked him to choose to take sides. And they've already closed the door. Like, Jay, what you were bringing up about how there are these areas of the Jedi Temple that are only accessible to masters that might apply to him seeking the knowledge to rescue Padme. And now that door has been shut in his face
Right.
because he's not going to be granted the rank of master.
Mhm.
Now, like, not only that, but now he's being asked to to choose between the Jedi and Palpatine, who's been his mentor and his friend for so long. Like, they're just driving him into the arms of Palpatine, and it doesn't matter how sad Obi-Wan is about the situation. Like, Obi-Wan is doing what he must, but yeah, it's just, ugh, you
Right.
keep seeing it.
Yeah, it's just a very icky situation all the way
Ugh.
around. But,
Mhm.
there's so many wheels in motion, even just in this particular scene, because, as you were saying, with the whole idea of Anakin being asked to do this, and then for Obi-Wan, Dennis, as you were saying, it's a bad situation for him as well. Just the
Mm.
fact that he has to tell Anakin, well, this isn't on the record. I mean, right there tells Anakin that there's some hypocrisy going on here, that there's
Yeah.
something not being upheld. This is not the right way to do things. And quite honestly, for the Jedi Council to ask Obi-Wan to do this, I understand it's because he was his former master and the two of them are super close. But realistically, I don't know if it would have been better for someone like Mace Windu to come to him and just almost give it to him as an order, as opposed to someone like Obi-Wan having to, basically rip his heart out and ask him to do this.
Oh,
I don't know
okay.
if it's just kind of more of a cold, kind of a thing, if Mace did it or if Yoda did it, more matter of fact, kind of, this is what we need you to do, or this is what we do need from you, Anakin, whatever, you know. And then he still wouldn't like it, but at least it wouldn't feel like a betrayal like it does from
Mm,
Obi-Wan. And it just
okay.
feels wrong to him, and
Mhm.
that's just, there's a lot of betrayal, there's a lot of, you know, kind of the whole wrong feeling of it. It's just the whole hypocrisy, all of that I feel like is just seething at this
Mm,
point.
yeah. Yeah.
So, question here, and this will spill over to another scene in this segment here, but was this just the result of the bait that this whole request by the council? Is it in your all's opinion? Is this the bait that Palpatine left for the Jedi Council, which is, if I put him on the council, then that just gives me an opportunity to sow more discord and ask by getting the council to ask Anakin to do something like this. Because if he's close, if he's there in the council, then I've already got this influence with Anakin, and then they can try and use their influence on here. So, if it was, it's akin to kind of like, the double spy, type of a
Oh
thing here
yeah.
in this
Mhm.
case. So, is this Palpatine thinking that far ahead, or is he taking advantage of things as they come up?
Oh, go ahead, Alan. I have thoughts, but I want you to go first. You're our guest.
I think it's thank you. I
Of
think it's
course.
I think it's a little of both. And you know what? When I was watching this particular scene, I was thinking to myself, Palpatine has to have some sort of surveillance inside the Jedi Temple. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know if this is borne out by other storytelling or anything like that. So maybe it's already been confirmed and I just don't know it. But like, I'm I was utterly convinced that, like, he has to have some kind of access to surveillance in the Jedi Temple, and that would have to help him in making decisions like this. So I think, certainly he is opportunistic, I think, but I also think, yeah, he has to have greater knowledge than just being that clever, and having like some sort of like 190 IQ or something like that.
Yeah, well, I see where you're going with that, and there's gotta be something, right? Like some surveillance, but I don't know, I've always felt like Palpatine was just the master puppet, puppet master, master of puppets, and he's now engineered this perfect loyalty conflict. Anakin's feeling emotionally validated by Palpatine, he feels rejected and used by the Jedi, so he's kinda stuck in this moral gray zone. He's
Mhm.
not, like, really fully aligned with their side at this point and feeling like no one really truly trusts him. So, there's like internal chaos, as is always Anakin, but it's even more, I think, at this point. So I really do think that Palpatine, he orchestrated this perfectly.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, he did. Ugh.
Well, we'll get
Yeah.
we'll get another opportunity to discuss this here in just a second. But let's I want to save plenty of time for what happens to the Upper House. So let's move on.
Yes.
We get to see the Lat gunship with Yoda, Mace, and Obi-Wan on board, and they're shuttling Yoda to the spaceport so that he can get with his attack group to go help the Wookiees. And Obi-Wan remarks that Anakin did not take to his new assignment with much enthusiasm, and you can kind of see that Obi-Wan is distressed about this.
Mhm.
And then Mace muses, it's very dangerous putting them together, and he remarks that he doesn't trust Anakin about this. And this is where Obi-Wan sticks up for Anakin. Just like, no, due respect, is he not the chosen one? Is he not destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force? And Mace just is like, well, so the prophecy says. So I get the feeling, if he ever was before, Mace is not a believer in prophecy now. And Yoda expresses his doubts. A prophecy that misread it could have been. And then Obi-Wan stands up for Anakin again. He will not let me down. He never has on this.
I love that.
One thing that occurred to me is that, Jay, you and I recently discussed the Glass Abyss book on the podcast. And in that book, there's a scene or two where Mace kind of thinks back fondly on Anakin.
Yes.
And so with this viewing, this kind of made me sad here that things have gotten so bad that he no longer is thinking of Anakin as, that enthusiastic youngling, a learner that was in the Jedi Temple that could someone who could learn something from Bod and the like. And now Mace has gone so far the other direction. He doesn't like Anakin. He doesn't trust him. And he's got serious misgivings about him on this. But Jay, what do you think about all this discussion that they're having?
Yeah, well, again, I really do applaud Obi-Wan for sticking up for Anakin, as you said, and he really does with feeling, with all due respect, Masters, is he not the chosen one? And, to your point, as far as Mace goes, I was thinking about the Glass Abyss as well. And, again, thinking about those shatter points that Mace is typically able to see. And I think that, he's talked so much about the dark side clouding everything. And I think that he feels that there is a reason to distrust the situation. And he says he doesn't trust Anakin, but I think he's just looking for a place to put it. You know what I mean? Like he's trying to put a face with a name kind of a thing. And so if he can pin the mistrust on Anakin, then at least he's putting that face with that name, where realistically he just knows it's all off.
And what do you think, Alan?
It was so blatant for Mace to say, I don't trust him. And I was actually a little hurt by it as well. But the more I sat with it, the more I thought, well, there's a couple ways you could potentially look at that. I mean, it could just simply be an awareness that they've asked too much of him for the situation. And so it's, like they're saying they can't trust him, but it's not because they don't trust him per se. It could be that it's, they've overestimated what they think he's capable of under the circumstances, that it really is like asking too much of him, and that they don't trust that they're going to be able to get what they need from him. And Obi-Wan, Jay, as you were saying, like defends him and says he's never let me down. And yeah, I mean, I'm grateful that Obi-Wan was sticking up for him too. But yeah, it's harsh, and it does feel like it also goes back to that whole parent who's just done with the surly teenager and just wants to wash his hands of the situation. Like it's a sad scene for me.
Mm-hmm.
I always feel like Mace gets a bad rap, whether it's what happens here or his interactions with Ahsoka, from the Clone Wars. I mean,
Yeah.
he gets so much grief about that.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Okay,
let's take a step back for just a second. What does he say? He says it's very dangerous putting them together.
Yes.
He's not wrong. And to your point, Alan, he says he doesn't trust him. And I'm with you. I think it's an outstanding point. It's like, he doesn't trust Anakin, or he doesn't trust the situation, because they all know the influence that Palpatine has on him, and they already distrust Palpatine. So if they had taken a step back, Master Windu, one of the most venerable masters on the council, doesn't trust this situation, maybe we should reconsider this and not give him that assignment. Or let's send Anakin off to, I don't know, Kashyyyk with Yoda so that he can't be under the influence of Palpatine or something like that. Send him with Kenobi to Utapau. Get him away from Palpatine in this case. If they had just stopped and listened to Mace, they may not have run into the disaster that they did in this case.
That's true.
They should have trusted their own instincts in the Force in this situation. So,
yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, instead of like pushing them together, Palpatine and Anakin, if they didn't trust this situation, they should have, ripped them apart.
Yeah,
that's a great point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. We finally get an appearance by Padme in this segment, and that is her and Anakin are at her apartment, and it looks like their baby may be kicking because he seems to be interested in that. And then Anakin just kind of sighs and says, he's wondering what's happening to the Jedi Order, and remarks that the war might be destroying the principles of the Republic. Padme kind of takes this in, and her response is, have you ever considered we may be on the wrong side? What if the democracy we've been trying to preserve no longer exists, and the Republic has become the very evil we've been fighting to destroy? Talk about people ignoring their instincts. Here we go again. Anakin doesn't believe any of this, and he says that Padme sounds like a separatist. And if you'll just indulge me here while I get through a few more lines of this, because there's just a lot to talk about here.
Yeah.
She says that this war represents a failure to listen, and then she pleads with Anakin to, you're closer to the Chancellor than anybody. Ask him to stop the fighting so the diplomacy can resume. And Anakin barks back at her, don't ask me to do that. Make a motion in the Senate where that question belongs. And at this point, Padme's like knows there's something more wrong. That's what's going on than what he said. And, she says, you hold me, think back to that time we were on Naboo and there was no war, and, you held me by the lake. And whatever you get. Before we even get into this, what do you think about Padme in this movie, Alan? Since we haven't had a chance to talk about her yet, and she's the other major character.
Criminally misused. I feel like I feel like they just they turned her into a mother in waiting, and that's all her purpose was. I feel like she had much more agency in Attack of the Clones, and I feel like that was kind of taken away from her largely in this particular movie. I wanted more from her, and I guess I grant that she was in a delicate way, as it were, but I went to a concert many years ago to watch Ani DeFranco, great folk artist, play. She was 8 months pregnant, and I have never seen anybody like rocking out with like this giant steel string guitar, working around a huge baby bump, and just put on an incredible concert. Of all things, if you had asked me what I was going to say about Padme in this like an hour ago, I would not have come up with this was nowhere, and suddenly it just came fully formed in my head. Like, I feel like there was more that Padme could have done, even despite being pregnant in the movie, and I wish that they had given her something more significant to do.
Yeah, along those lines, I wish they hadn't cut the scene with her talking to Bail Organa Mon Mothma about the what is it, the 2000 planets, the conference of the 2000 or something like this, that we're going to file that protest with Palpatine. You see her doing more, being the leader that she became, something along those lines. But anyway, so back to this scene here. Are they right about this? I mean, it's Anakin's got his doubts about the Jedi Order and the Republic, and then Padme is also got her doubts about this. What's your take?
I mean, they're both kind of right in a way, and it's an interesting parallel to the conversation that Obi-Wan and Anakin have prior to this, because Obi-Wan talks about how Palpatine has been in office long since his term expired, and Anakin's reaction is, well, the Senate voted him for that, like it's the Senate's fault. And then you have Padme talking about, what if this is no longer democracy, which is essentially the definition of the situation, because if Palpatine has been in office long after his term expired, then we're not talking about a democracy anymore. We're talking about something different. We're talking about, you know, additional powers being granted to the executive and of a Senate that is, uh, you know, I feel like saying abdicating its duty is probably stating it a little too strongly, maybe, but they're certainly happy to, you know, allow their power to be usurped by Palpatine progressively. So, she's not wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jay, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, again, to your point with the novelization, Padme is just coming into the scene after meeting with the delegation of the 2000. And so
Mm,
she is actively working behind the scenes, Alan, to what you were saying, that she was, in the novelization actually doing a lot of things and, urging all of these emergency powers to be given up and, whatnot. And then Anakin is just coming off of the scene where he's finding out that he is supposed to be spying on the Chancellor. And so, they're both coming into the scene with heightened emotions.
mhm,
And, they're both seeing things from that perspective of what they were just experiencing. And they are kind of at odds at this point, which is really sad. And,
mhm,
there's a few things that I want to point out that I wrote down, in that the fact that this scene is taking place at twilight, which is, right before the dark. So it's
mhm,
as the light is starting to ebb from the day. And
mhm,
you could tell that there's a lot of emotional disconnect going on in this scene between the two of them. There's some tension, even though it is soft and intimate, as you mentioned, Dennis, with Anakin interacting with Padme and their unborn baby and everything like that. But I mean, Padme just basically kind of throws up her hands and says, just hold me like you did on Naboo, when there was nothing but our love. And, just let's just not even think about this right now. And you can tell that, Anakin kind of resolves to just sort of being very stoic and holding her, but also stewing about everything that was just said and thinking, okay, where's this going to go next? Now this has been happening and people are asking me to spy. And now what if my wife is turning into a separatist and all of these things? And what's really sad is that this is the last normal conversation, if you want to call it normal, that the two of them have before things go haywire.
mm.
Mm-hmm.
And that to
Okay.
me breaks my heart.
Oh, yeah. And it's also it's this will become sort of an interesting thing when we get to the next scene too, but like and it gets a little more called out in the novelization, where Anakin kind of throws a little bit of a hissy and is like, like, stop asking me for stuff like that, and the Jedi are asking me for stuff like that. So he's coming at it as people just want to use him
Yep.
because of his position and connection with Palpatine. Padme wants to use him to get him to advocate for diplomacy. The Jedi want to use him to spy about what's going on and what he's doing, and that's all very selfish stuff, whereas Palpatine has never asked anything of Anakin like that.
Right.
Well, I think I would push back on that a little bit, which is
Uh,
simply, I need you, son. I need you to be my
okay, that's fair.
overseer
Yep.
of the Republic here. So I think the notion of your point that you're making is absolutely correct. And the
Mm,
problem is he's got three different groups:
hmm.
Palpatine, the Jedi, and well, not groups, but three different, people, whatever.
Yeah.
And Padme now all asking him for conflicting things
Mm,
on
Mhm.
hmm.
this. It's the Jedi want him to spy on Palpatine. Palpatine wants him to spy on the Jedi, to be his voice, to assert his authority over the Jedi. And now Padme's like, and I want you to tell Palpatine to stop doing what he's doing. And so it's like, how can he possibly do all these things at the same time?
Mhm.
Hmm.
He
Mhm.
simply can't. And one last thing about Padme is that you think back to the Phantom Menace. When she left Coruscant, what did she say? It occurs to me that the Senate and the Republic no longer functions.
Mm, hmm.
She's known this for now, what, 13 years? on
Yeah.
this, and she's worked in a space that is inherently broken, and she's done her best as an ally to Chancellor Palpatine at times to try and bring the Republic back into line, to make it function, to make it work again, and it's all fallen apart.
Mhm.
Palpatine's got emergency powers. He is, totalitarian authority in a lot of ways in this, and he keeps getting more and more and more power. And she's trying to stop a war. She's trying to find the peaceful solution here, and no one's interested in that, because as long as the war is going on, Palpatine acquires more power on this. So I can see how she'd be very disillusioned with
Mhm.
everything.
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
This is going long, but I don't care, because now we have the Opera House.
I'm sorry
Yeah.
to
This is all for good cause, so no one needs to be sorry. So here we are. Anakin goes to meet Palpatine at his box at the Opera House, and he gets up there, and Palpatine reports that, okay, I skipped over the great cameo of George Lucas himself. We brought him up a number of times, so we need to
Oh,
acknowledge
yeah.
that he was there in blue paint as a Pantoran. But then he sits down next to Palpatine, and Palpatine reports that clone intelligence discovered General Grievous is hiding in the Utapau system. And then Palpatine strokes Anakin's ego a little bit by says that he thinks the Jedi would essentially lost their minds if they didn't ask Anakin to lead the mission to go confront him. And he further says that they can't rely on the Jedi Council. They will soon include Anakin in their plot. And that is that the Jedi want to control the Republic, and they will betray Palpatine because, search your feelings. And his response is, I know they don't trust you. And he does admit that his faith in the Jedi has been shaken. And this is where Palpatine picks up on everything. He's like, why? They asked you to do something that made you feel dishonest, didn't they? So back to your whole notion that there may have been a spy among them, or surveillance. They asked you to spy on me, didn't they? And then we get into this whole discussion about the Jedi compared to the Sith. But let's just talk about this part of it first here. Earlier I brought up the whole notion about how much of this was Palpatine putting out bait, and how much of it was just chance and him taking advantage of things. Or Alan, you kind of brought that up some too. But it seems like we have an awful lot of coincidences going on here. And when you get one, it's a coincidence. Two, we're up to something here. So, you still think it's a coincidence, or what do you think, given all this?
Yeah, and 3 times is a conspiracy, right? So, to bring back the novelization around this, before Anakin came into the Jedi Council chambers, they had already decided that Obi-Wan was going to be the one to go after Grievous. So this to me kind of solidifies the idea of Palpatine has listening devices inside the Jedi Council chambers, because why tell Anakin, like, they'd be a fool to send anyone but you,
Right.
when like he already knows that they're not sending him. But I think it's, for the purposes of this discussion, I think, have to be fair at some level and say, like, let's only talk about what we see in the movie itself, maybe. But like, yeah, I think it's all bait. To your point, like, it really is it's just throwing out red meat, and he knows that Anakin is proud. He knows that he's got, a strong ego about his abilities, and that he's convinced that he is more powerful than half of the masters on the Jedi Council. Like, of course, he's gonna Palpatine is gonna say something like that, and of course Anakin is going to absolutely and utterly believe that that is the truth. Like, that is the truth coming out of Palpatine's mouth, 100%. And if it turns out that, oh yeah, they do pick him to go on this mission, well, then Palpatine was right. And if they don't pick him for the mission, then Palpatine was right anyway, because they're fools to not send him.
Right.
So yeah, it's Palpatine's just masterful with his manipulations.
Yes, there is no absolute in this particular situation, which is ironic because, supposedly only Sith deal in absolutes.
Right.
Ha.
Yeah, and again, as we were talking about earlier, it's too simplistic to say that Anakin fell to the dark side simply because he was looking for a way to save Padmé's life. That was a big part of it. But the other part was Palpatine had to drive a wedge between Anakin and the Jedi, and he had to then lay the seeds that being a Sith isn't so bad, which is what
Right.
we get right here. And Palpatine starts talking about how, all who gain power are afraid to lose it, even the Jedi. And then, Anakin's kind of protesting, and like, the Jedi only think of themselves, and they just want to serve others. Or I'm sorry, I said that wrong. The Jedi don't think about themselves; they want to serve others. And Palpatine is, going on that, well, good is a point of view, and he says that the Sith and the Jedi are similar in almost every way, including their quest for greater power. And Anakin knows a thing or two about the Sith. He says, well, the Sith are on their passion for the strength. They think inwards only about themselves. And Palpatine throws back, and the Jedi don't. Anakin confidently says the Jedi are selfless. They only care about others. And so this, again, Palpatine didn't have to completely sell him on the Jedi-Sith dichotomy here. He just kind of had to lay that groundwork. But then he kind of lays down his trump card, which is the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. So before we start talking about that, what do you think about the comparison between the Jedi and the Sith, Alan?
Well, one of the things that jumped out at me with this scene is I was trying to think about when in the past has anyone mentioned the Sith. In particular, like when Palpatine mentions the Sith to Anakin, Anakin doesn't like whip around and go, "What do you know about the Sith?" or anything like that, which says to me that they've had conversations about the Sith before. And maybe it sort of makes sense because maybe there was some conversation of like, oh, Dooku was a Sith Lord or something like that. So, like maybe there's plausible deniability around that. But I felt like, oh, they've had conversations about the Sith before, which seems, like striking to me. And that was something else that I hadn't thought about in previous viewings or anything, that just Anakin wasn't treating this as like, this is out of bounds. Why, what do you know about the Sith? And why are we talking about the Sith? Like, what, and why do you think you know anything about the Sith? Like, this said to me that they've actually had some level of conversation about this at some point. And so I was kind of struck by, oh, like this is other groundwork that Palpatine has been laying on this for so long. So it was just like, oh, and this too. Ah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's
that's
so
a good
true.
point, because of course, there's a notion that there's another Sith out there after Darth Maul and the Phantom Menace, and they've been looking for. And then, of course, there's the belief that they come to find out Darth Tyrannus is, of course, with the Clone Wars, but again, before this movie's before that time. But you're right, this notion that because Anakin says, "Oh, you know about the dark side," and and Palpatine will say, "Oh, my mentor, taught me all about this type of thing here," and so that's why he would know. But it is a bit shocking for. I had never thought of it that way. You're right in this context. For it's just, oh yeah, the Sith. Let's think about them for a little bit, despite the fact that one of them might have just been fighting against us in this situation here. But you have any thoughts on that, Jay?
Yeah, well, I mean, Palpatine never calls the Sith evil. He just basically offers it as a different point of view. He basically talks about the wise and powerful Plagueis, almost godlike in a way. And, just kind of putting it out there to Anakin in this story. And stories, a lot of times, they bypass logic. You know what I mean? When you tell a story about something, it hits more on emotion than it does on, fact and saying, oh, this is how the Sith were, and, and so on and so forth. And even though he says, my mentor taught me a lot of things, and he had a very kind retort for everything that Anakin was trying to kind of, not really even argue with him about. He was just more questioning, postulating, well, the Jedi are about compassion and this and that. And, and even though Palpatine is basically arguing against him, he does it in such a way that he's giving Anakin kind of an illusion of safety through this whole idea of what the Sith are. And then he just drops this casually drops this mythical cheat code to death kind of thing. And it's
Yeah.
I
just
love it.
it's
Yeah.
so seductive. So
Okay.
seductive.
What
Can
about
I
this?
say one other thing
Sure.
too, if I may? Oh, and shoot, did I just lose it? No. Oh, yes. So Palpatine also makes that comment about how everybody who seeks power is afraid to lose it, and I feel like that was also like potentially a little dangerous misstep, because you could, if Anakin had been on his game or had been thinking, in terms of his siding with the Jedi, he could have said, well, you know, Sheev, that includes you, right?
Steve.
Because you're seeking all this power. Like, are you afraid to lose these emergency powers and this,
Mhm.
you're not, you're term limited out and yet you're still running the show. Like, what about you, man? Like,
Mhm.
Great
and
point.
yeah, I think old Sheevy got away with one on that.
He did. He
He
did.
got away with more than just one, that's for
Well,
sure.
yeah.
But what do you think about these accusations that Palpatine is in a roundabout way accusing the Jedi of that, that they have a quest for greater power and that they too think inwards and only about themselves? Because when that's said about the Sith, Palpatine says, well, that's the same for the Jedi in this
Hmm.
case.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's a case to be made, and there's a school of thought where, um, like with altruistic acts, where sometimes people say like acts of altruism are not necessarily entirely selfless, because in some sense, psychologically speaking, you're also supporting the idea that you have of yourself as a person who would commit an altruistic act. So you are sort of acting selfishly in order to maintain your sense of identity as this selfless person. So there is like a base of selfishness to it in a way. Ultimately, the result of the act is a good thing if you're doing something altruistic, but that there may be, a selfish basis for it. And then the idea of the Jedi questing for additional power, I mean, they are moving up from, from youngling to Padawan to knight to master. Like, there is always this progression for greater, greater ability, greater control, greater mastery of the Force. I guess, one way you could describe that mastery is power, even though I think the Jedi themselves would probably say, no, we're just trying to learn how to commune more directly and in tune with the Force. But
Right.
it also opens up more abilities, and it opens up more amazing things, like a knight can use the Force to propel himself or herself themselves higher in a jump than a youngling could, for example. So, like, yeah, power is ultimately part of the equation, I feel like, even if they're not naming it through that dynamic.
Oh,
Mhm.
for sure. Yeah, because he even basically in a roundabout way says that, the Jedi are just too dogmatic and weak to embrace these other abilities, and the way that he says that the dark side is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. And he's
uh,
just like salivating over that word. You know what I mean? It's just he's just wow.
mhm.
I mean, he does such a good
Mhm.
job with that. It's
Oh my
incredible.
gosh.
And he never pushes, he never demands, he just kinda lets Anakin draw his own conclusions, "Is it possible to learn this power?" And then when he turns and says, "Not from a Jedi." Oh, you feel it, like, he's just got that victory right there. It's chilling,
Mhm.
chilling.
Yep. Okay. Well, you're previewing our entire Darth Plagueis discussion here in just a
Yes,
second,
sorry.
but that's okay. That's
Oh,
okay. We're all eager to get there. I just want to make one last statement about this, then we can get Darth Plagueis wise because I've been holding everyone leashes to make sure they haven't jump ahead yet. But
sorry.
the
Yeah.
no, it's okay.
And
It's
yet we
okay.
are, sorry.
We got to get to it. But here's the thing: there's always a kernel of truth to the best lies in all of
Mm,
this, and to the point
mhm.
you're making that sure, Jedi may seek greater power, and there is that progression in this. But why are they doing it? So they can hear. They would tell you so they could hear the will of the Force, and they can commune and try and carry out the will of the Force. Why did the Sith do it? Well, typically it is so that they can increase their own power, they can conquer, they can be in control, they can manipulate. Is what it comes down to. It is much more of an inward looking thing for them. It's the dark side and light side are two sides of the same coin when it comes down to it, but there's a difference there. Okay, that's overly simplistic, but let's get to the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. So
that's dead on.
Yeah, when he doesn't necessarily land everything with Anakin, he's at least planted the seed on this difference between the Jedi and the Sith. He then teases out the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. And, have you ever heard the tale of the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? And, no. I was like, well, it's, of course not. It's a story the Jedi wouldn't tell. I was like, would the Jedi even know? Because were they ever aware of someone named Darth Plagueis? Because that was Palpatine's mentor on this. Why would they even know? So he admits that fact. Okay. But it's essentially a Sith legend. And of course, Plagueis was someone so powerful and so wise, he could use the Force to influence the midichlorians to create life. Which, okay, one tease there for everything we know about Anakin. 2, he had such knowledge of the dark side, he could even keep the ones he cared about from dying. And this really piques Anakin's interest. He could actually save people from death. And then, Jay, you can go ahead and give the line again. The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. Okay, but then he was only afraid of losing his power, which eventually, of course, he did. Unfortunately, he taught his apprentice everything he knew, and his apprentice killed him in his sleep. It's ironic. He could save others from death, but not himself. And I love the way it's just like you can see Palpatine like envisioning this in his mind and thinking back to it. He's kind of got that tongue in his cheek, and he's just like, "Good times."
Yeah, good times.
He ends the whole thing with Anakin. Anakin's clearly got his interest piqued by this. Is it possible to learn this power? And that's not from a Jedi. Okay. It's such a fantastic part of the movie. Jay, you're absolutely right. The delivery on this was perfect. It was just so incredible. Alan, what do you think about this?
Oh, well, if I can quickly share something from the Star Wars archives, this scene actually did not appear in the first draft of the movie, according to the book. This was in the second draft of things, but also Lucas realized that I guess he initially had it in Palpatine's office and then was reading his script and was like, I've had like 4 scenes in Palpatine's office. I got to do something else. So that's when he came up with the opera, which he refers to in this thing as Squid Lake instead of Swan Lake, which I guess it's a Mon Calamari opera thing that's happening. So I thought that was very fun. And there's also an interview or like a quote with Ian McDiarmid where he's actually like giving a lot of praise to Hayden Christensen about Hayden's performance and about how he gets to play off the things that are happening in Hayden's expressions as he's doing the scene too. So that was really cool. The thing that I noticed about this that I hadn't really caught previously was when I think the key thing that Palpatine says here is saying that Plagueis could save the people he cared about from dying. And that right there, like, as opposed to everything that they've been talking about with the Sith being selfish, like, yes, it's selfish. And this goes back to what I was saying about like altruistic acts having a kernel of selfishness within them, but they are still altruistic acts. They are still benefiting other people. So Palpatine is giving an instance of a Sith who is acting to do something nice for other people. He's actually trying to save the lives of other people. This is not a Sith who is acting solely for his own benefit, to the detriment of others. No, this is somebody who's actually trying to save people. So, oh my gosh, maybe there's, there's a possibility that the Sith aren't all that bad, so to speak, from a certain point of view, and that it's possible to learn a power that the Jedi won't teach you that yet could still be something beneficial. And also makes me think that Palpatine had surveillance devices in the meditation room where Anakin and Yoda were.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, and to your point, Palpatine selling it to Anakin as a path to compassionate power. in a
Yes.
way to protect the ones that you love,
Hmm.
and he gives it, again, it's a story, but it's almost like a religious sermon. It's slow, it's soft, it's rhythmic, kind of thing, and he savors every word.
Oh
It's
God, Ian
almost like
McDiarmid is so good.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
it's almost like attachment's not so bad when you hear it from a Sith, because
right.
Right.
you don't have to be afraid of losing anyone if you can save their life. Just keep them from
Hmm.
dying in the first
Exactly.
place. So,
Exactly. And that's in the novelization. That was one thing too. And he even says to Anakin that the Jedi teach you to suppress your emotions and deny your attachments. But what if your emotions are the key to your strength? What if your fear, your anger, and your love could be harnessed to achieve greatness?
Hmm.
And
mhm.
that, he doesn't say that at the Opera House, but, that's basically the underlying message that Anakin's getting from this.
Yeah. And that's another place like where the novelization I was like, I think I prefer the movie version better because like Palpatine's progressive they told you to do something, huh? They asked you to spy on me, huh? Like it comes like real like bang 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 in the novel, but Ian McDiarmid's performance in the movie is like, they asked you something, didn't they? And
Right.
then he
Mhm.
just
Very
sits on
subtle.
it. Yeah, just sits with it. And then he goes, they asked you to spy on me. And I'm like, ooh,
Mhm.
ooh, he is just so good. I mean, as an actor and also just even the
Oh,
character and the
yeah.
way they play it out. Oh
The
God, he is
delivery.
hewing the scenery with that. And I love every second of the performance.
For
Well, and
sure.
it's like when he starts the story, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's he's been dying to tell
Oh,
somebody about
yeah.
how he became the Sith Lord, and
Yes.
he can't tell anybody because that defeats the whole purpose. So
Yes.
maybe he's told Maul about it, maybe he's told Dooku about it at some point, but they're gone. He has nobody else he can share this story with. So it's like, you ever hear the tragedy of
Yes. By
Darth
the way, I've got a fun little fireside
hypothetically, this
chat
guy,
for you.
what if I told you about how I killed my mentor?
Ah,
Just, and then he just, by the end of it, just like, just relishing that victory he had over his master, as you put it, salivating Jay. It's, in
mm-hmm.
this case,
Yeah.
because how else can he tell the story? And it serves a purpose on top of that. It's,
Mm-hmm.
he's such a salesman in this notion. He's talked about, he's given Anakin the news that the Jedi couldn't find, which is where Grievous is. And then he mentions this whole bit about, oh, yeah, I pick up you're frustrated on the council. Well, let me tell you, I'm frustrated with the council. And oof, you realize that they're going to engage in my plot. And, you're frustrated with the Jedi? Yeah, there's this other group you might want to check out, change your employer, the Sith. I hear they're hiring. And then he gives them, this is what they can do for you in this type of
Yeah, the
situation. So,
pitch.
I mean, it's
So
such a
true.
multi-level pitch that he puts out there. And
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
again, I know that Lucas had script doctors that helped him out with this stuff, but this was his idea. And it was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about our favorite scenes, this is why this, I think, resonates with so many people, because it just works so well.
Oh, yeah. And can we just give kudos also to the framing of this with the side profile of Anakin, and he is so engrossed in, like, every word that Palpatine is saying, and Palpatine knows he's hanging on every single word, and
Mm-hmm.
I just love that framing device and the way
Mhm.
they go back and forth, and just Hayden Christensen just nails it. You can see those inner wheels moving in his head and everything that's going on in there.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And when Dennis, when you reached out to me about this episode and you told me what the timestamp was, like I went to look and like I was over the moon because this was part of the segment. I was like, this was yeah. I mean, you could not have asked me for, to join at a better place as far as I was concerned. Like
Well,
and
good.
I love Dennis your idea about how Palpatine may have told this story to Maul and to Dooku at some point. I love thinking about like when would they have possibly done it? Like
Mhm.
would it have been in Phantom Menace? Like would he have been hanging out on the balcony with Maul before he sent him out to Tatooine? Like I didn't tell you, they're just taking in the night skyline and Palpatine just sitting there going, "Did I ever tell you about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?" Like when would he have had that conversation with him?
Oh
I
my gosh.
love thinking about that
Right?
possibility.
Well, in Legends, didn't they say that Palpatine was the one that gave Maul his tattoos? So could you
Oh,
see him just like, with the tattoo pen going, "Did I ever tell you the tragedy?" As he's like tattooing Maul, kind of thing.
Well, one other thing I wanted to touch on, the comment that you were making earlier, Alan, about how this was set at the Opera House. Some of the reasons for that is because they already had so many scenes in Palpatine's office. It also gave them the excuse to have all that Mon Calamari chanting going on,
Oh,
which
yes.
provided the first perfect musical backdrop to this entire, that that's going on the
Yeah.
entire time without
Yes.
having to rely on, which, okay, it's not a bad thing if you did, but you didn't have to rely on John Williams' score to do that.
Mhm.
You had this opera going on that provided the perfect music for this discussion. So,
Right.
Good point.
100%
okay.
agree.
Well, this went long, but it was worth every single minute. I love this discussion. This was
Oh, yeah.
fantastic. Jay, you and I are just blessed that we continue to get such great guests to discuss these
Oh,
segments
for
with. And
sure.
Alan, you've lived up to your past reputation on every time you've done an appearance on this.
Thank you.
Thank you so
I
much for
love
joining
doing
us.
this with you guys. Like I love it. And so I can't stop talking.
Well,
Yeah.
we cherish every moment with you as well, Alan, for sure.
But before we go, I just want to remind everybody what you got going on with Star Wars 7x7 and anything else you're up to.
So the podcast Star Wars 7x7 had been for more than 10 years a daily Star Wars podcast, and I went on a hiatus of sorts in July of last year. I have been getting episodes out recently and am figuring out what the next phase of it is going to look like. But the thing I've been working on most recently is a book called Hyperspacing Hope, which is taking work that I did on the podcast a few years back, analyzing how hope is expressed in all of the Star Wars movies and kind of examining the nature of hope and what we can take from it and learn from it for our own lives. And it builds off a TEDx talk that I was able to do in 2019. So I'm very close to having that published. I'm hoping to have it published by the end of May. And so that's very exciting, and it's been something that I've wanted to do for a long time. So I'm very grateful that I am taking the opportunity with the downtime from not producing the podcast on a daily basis to be able to finally put this out into the world. So that is hopefully coming soon, and announcements and more about that will be coming on the website for the podcast, sw7x7.com, and on all your favorite podcast channels and YouTube as well.
Fantastic.
Looking forward to it. Well, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk with the both of you.
All right. There he was. That was Alan Voivod. And he's always so fantastic to have on this show.
Always.
As you were saying at the top, his enthusiasm is unbridled for all of this. And he always does his homework and comes beyond well prepared. And so it's always a pleasure to have him here on the show.
For sure, for sure. And just the infectious, as I said, the passion that he brings into it is just amazing. So thank you again, Alan.
Indeed. All right. Well, with that, we're just left to say thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and in the fourth installment in our Revenge of the Sith series. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion. And if you want to make sure you get part 5, if you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe button on your podcatcher of choice. And while you're there, if you would go ahead and do things like rate and review the show, I'd appreciate that. I was actually playing around with some podcatchers this past week and noticed some of y'all have been doing that on podcatchers I didn't even know collected rating. So thank you all thank you to all that have taken the time to do that for us. It really helps. And then if you want to find additional episodes of the podcast beyond what's available on your podcatcher, the best place to do that is retrozap.com, which is also home to other shows on the RetroZap Podcast Network, covering all kinds of stuff from Star Trek to superheroes, Dune, and more. Jay, you want to go ahead and give everybody our social media contacts one more time?
Absolutely. So once again, we are very conveniently and easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And we do maintain some Pinterest boards. And as Dennis was mentioning, there's a lot of other places to find us as well. So you can do that on YouTube as well as YouTube Music. So we'd love to hear your thoughts, those support interactions. And please hit that subscribe button because that does help us out a ton. And you can also support us by picking up one of 7 different show logo designs on all kinds of things from apparel to home goods over on TeePublic. So if you are interested in that, the link to that will be in our show notes.
All right, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what you got going on in cosplay?
Sure. And I actually have, once again, a little bit of an announcement. So I will be appearing May 10th at the Sweets and Geeks Collectible in Expo and Pop Culture Convention at North Olmsted, Ohio at the Great Northern Mall. So I will be there all day long from 11 to 8 p.m. And in the meantime, you can catch me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And you can see me as Ahsoka, the fourth sister, 2 different versions of Hera, my original concept Mandalorian, and much, much more.
Okay. So this is where part of the show where I tell you what's coming up next. Here's the thing. We're recording this before Star Wars Celebration Japan. And yeah, I'm not exactly sure what order we're going to cover everything because we've got 3 episodes Andor to discuss. And it looks like some new like magic episodes to discuss, and plenty of news out of Celebration. So we're going to, as Celebration's happening, take all that in and decide our release order on all that content. But I can tell you this: between Friday and Monday, you'll be getting a roundup of some news and some discussion of Andor. So tune in for that, and you'll be surprised, like the rest of us, when that happens. Okay. With that said, thanks for listening to episode 877 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be